going back in the day, you know what a Sunday night was back in the 60s? Bonanza, that's what it was. I'm not going to sit here and tell you about the Grindhouse Report and Bonanza, because that's like fucking total. Nobody would buy that. No, but my point, as fucked up as it is that Westerns were a huge Grindhouse staple. Even going back to when before, you know, I was going to grindhouses. I mean, you know, returning vets from World War II, they went to the grindhouses and saw, you know, those Westerns, you know, those, I don't know what, I can't think of any Western that would be exciting in the 40s maybe. I really can't, but nevertheless they worked. Thing is, a lot of your Western stars, it started in the 60s rather, achieved superstardom, you know, back in the 70s. Now see, here's the thing, I'm going to throw like weird little fucking facts out there. Your three 70s icons, Lee Van Cleef, Clint Eastwood, Charles Bronson, all were either in a horror movie or were killing monsters. Think about it. Clint Eastwood was in Return of the Creature. Or was it The Creature's Revenge? I don't know. You know, that's why I smoke weed, to forget, but not really. He was a lab assistant in the second Creature from the Black Lagoon movie. And he also killed Tarantula, the big tarantula. He was the jet pilot, both uncredited. Unaccredited, whatever the fuck they call it. Lee Van Cleef killed the beast from 20,000 Fathoms and the space monster from It Conquered the World. Charles Bronson was Vincent Price's assistant Igor in House of Wax, and also was with Vinny in Master of the World. So there's a weird little fact you can wrap your head around. Thing is, I was always into character actors, because the simple thing is, you remember these guys one way or another. I mean, when I think of Richard Widmark, I remember him pushing some lady in a wheelchair down a flight of stairs. You know, then there's the steely-eyed stare of Lee Van Cleef, the brute force of Ernest Borgnine and Lee Marvin. Out-and-out sinister guys, you know, Bronson would scare the shit out of you. But all these guys went on, you know, in the 50s and the 60s, there was a shitload of Western TV shows. And all these guys did guest spots in them. Gunsmoke, Bonanza, Have Gun Will Travel, Cheyenne, Sugarfoot, The Virginian. I mean, there was a ton of them out there. And all these returning World War II vets like Lee Marvin, Lee Van Cleef, Ernest Borgnine, Bronson, not so much Jack Elam because he didn't go, he had a bad eye, Strother Martin, you know, all these guys came back and studied acting under the GI Bill and, you know, found work as heavies in these Westerns. And then, of course, they segued their way into, like, you know, movie Westerns, major motion pictures. Thing is, I was watching, you know, mainstay, I don't know, I'm trying to think. Mainstay was Randolph Scott movies that were released by Columbia. So, being that I'm got nothing better to do, I decided to check some of these out. And the interesting thing was that a lot of these guys were playing the heavies in these Randolph Scott movies. I just saw one with Richard Boone as the lead bad guy and Henry Silva as this psycho fucking gunfighter. Then there was another one with Claude Atkins as the lead bad guy. And another one with L.Q. Jones, who starts off as a bad guy and becomes a good guy. And there was one with Lee Marvin. I mean, you know, all these guys were in there. It just was so, you know, fucking cool to just watch the progression. And, you know, after a while, the whole, you know, good guy riding off with the fucking girl or whatever the hell, or, you know, the white hat versus the black hat became pretty passé, and then business dropped off. Until they needed a harder edge. So, everybody thinks that Clint Eastwood was the first, like, anti-hero in a Western, sort of because of the look, but I'm going to go back to, like, I believe it was 63. there was a Western release called Rio Conchos with Richard Boone in the lead. It was also Jim Brown's first movie, co-starred Stuart Whitman, Tony Francioso, Edmund O'Brien, and an uncredited Timothy Carey as Chico the bartender. So this thing starts out with this Apache burial party getting shot by an unknown gunman. And then the unknown gunman is tracked down to this burnt-out shack by Stuart Whitman character and the Jim Brown character. And the unknown gunman is Major Lassiter from the Confederate Army, Richard Boone, who was raging a one-man vendetta against the Apache because they massacred his family. But the interesting thing that they wanted was this repeating rifle he has, because it was part of a shipment that was stolen for some reason. So of course they bring him back, and he's none too cooperative. So they throw him in a cell with this Mexican, Martinez, who's supposed to be hung, who was Anthony Franciosa. So it winds up that they have a history, and the Lassiter character is pretty much of an alcoholic, as unfortunately Boone was himself. And there are times, and I have no way to confirm or deny this, that I actually think that he was ad-libbing his way through the whole thing. It just looked like he was pounding stuff down. I mean, Richard Boone is a hell of an actor. Was a hell of an actor. Unfortunately, ain't with us anymore. But you know, he wants Martinez to come with him because he's going to be sent to find the rifles with the Stuart Whitman character and the Jim Brown character, and he wants his own guy. So there's a scene where Martinez is laying in the bunk and he sees a scorpion crawling up a wall, and he has a knife hidden in his boot. He slides it out and pins the scorpion to the wall. Interestingly enough, that scene was lifted for the Korean film The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. So obviously that director had to be a huge fan of this film, and there was a lot of other homages in that to American westerns and spaghetti westerns. So of course they go looking for the you know, this wagon load of stuff, and Lassiter and Martinez are not armed. The other two are, and then all of a sudden they decide that Lassiter finds that there's a bunch of bandits coming after him. So there's a huge shootout in this. And this is one of these things where, for like 63, this was pretty violent shit. Because one thing, Martinez is going to Franklin, Jim Brown's character, I don't have a weapon, and Franklin drops a knife. Martinez picks it up, starts sharpening it again on the wheel, and then he throws it at one guy, takes him off on the horseback, and when the guy's body's dragged by him, he yanks the knife out of his chest and stabs another guy. So it goes on and on like that. Then there's one where they find a ranch where it was burned out, but there's a woman strapped to a bed, and they don't show what actually went on, but there's also an injured baby, which is, you know, pretty hardcore for that era, I would think, a baby with blood on it. So then there's another shootout with the Apaches, and Lassiter completely loses it because he sets the brush on fire, and one of the Apaches comes out burning up, and he's like, you know, screaming, "Let him burn, let him burn!" So he gets knocked out, and they shoot the Apache. So the whole thing is they captured this Indian girl. I can't remember her name because Wendy Wagner. I don't know what her deal was introducing Wendy Wagner. Whether she went anywhere after that, I don't know. But after the baby dies, Stuart Whitman convinces her, like, you know, tell us where this thing is, because the whole thing was they got a bunch of gunpowder as bait for the guys who stole the guns. And the guys who stole the guns are ex-Confederate officer Theron Pardee, who is basically trying to rebuild the South on the Rio Bravos, or, you know, Rio Conchos rather, the river, and reconstruct the Confederacy. So Martinez takes off. He's going to sell everybody out, but Lassiter catches up to him in Chico's saloon and kills him, and then they get to where they're going, and Lassiter's character pretty much is convinces Pardee that they're on the up and up, until Bloodshirt, the Apache chief, comes in, played by a perennial Mexican bad guy, Rodolfo Acosta. So he doesn't buy the whole fact that Lassiter's selling the guns, and Lassiter loses his shit and breaks the glass showcase over his head, so they're dragged out and tortured and fucked up by the Indians and left to die. And then the Indian chick lets them go, and then they ride the wagon of gunpowder into the fucking rifles and explodes, and of course the soldier and the Indian girl get away. I mean, it's a lot better than it fucking sounds. I'm giving you a blow by blow here because I'm stoned, but Boone's character was the scraggly, rough, unshaven, dirty anti-hero, which became personified by Clint Eastwood about a year later in For a Few Dollars, A Fistful of Dollars. So it's interesting how that progression started, because the films had to get rougher and more violent, because once Fistful of Dollars came in, and I'll do a whole thing on spaghetti westerns down the road, that sort of kicked open the door. It's like, all right, we got to up the ante in American westerns, because we, you know, basically we can't compete with the body count. Not that we're going to fucking top it, because you got to figure the body count for A Fistful of Dollars would probably surpass the combined body counts for all the Friday the 13th, the Halloweens, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the Elm Street films combined. Yeah, think of it. So, you know, you had that. So that sort of like pushed things to go a little bit further. There was a juvenile delinquent western called Young Fury out around, I think, 64. And it was, you know, an A.C. Lyle's deal, because he was putting out these low-budget westerns, pretty much headlining with Rory Calhoun and some other old-timers, or, you know, not that Rory was washed up at that point, but he would be the lead, and he'd fill it in with, like, Lon Chaney Jr., Richard Arland, you know, people like that. And this one, Young Fury, was basically this gang of wildcats comes into town and trees it up, and they're looking to basically hang around because the Dawson gang got out of jail, and the Dawson gang was turned in by one of the guy's fathers, who was played by Rory Calhoun. So it's like, you know, wait around till the Dawsons show up, and there's a bunch of brawls and other crap going on to keep us occupied until Agar and company show up. And at the end it gets, you know, again, this gets pretty fucking hardcore for a 60s film, because there's a bullet in the throat that's like spurting blood, almost a slow motion knife thrown from a building in the back, and then John Agar gets shot in the face, and his face dissolves in a shower of blood. So, you know, here you got this little segue with the westerns getting like approaching almost like Blood Feast 2000 Maniacs territory, because things were like loosening up in the, you know, mid 60s here. Of course, you know, the one that kicked the door open for everything was the Wild Bunch. You know, Seven Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. You know, I could get in, I'm going to get into detail on Peckinpah stuff down the road too. I'm just glossing over some stuff because it was sort of like everybody had to kick it up a little bit. There were more adult-type westerns being made, like Hombre, which Paul Newman was the star, and again, Richard Boone was the hero. And this was, I think he was just coming off Paladin around that time or something. So he had a long-running TV series, Have Gun Will Travel, where he was this gunfighter that lived in luxury in the San Francisco hotel. And if you look at his look, and you look at the look of Hugh Hefner, gee, guess where Hef took that look from? Yep. You just check it out. It's an astounding little coincidence. Or is it really a coincidence? But anyway, you know, Richard Boone was the ragged anti-hero in this. And also, you know, John Wayne was still around. And, you know, the Duke had to up the ante in violence in his films. Like Rio Lobo kicked it up a notch. And Big Jake was the last film where he was #1 at the box office, where he had a #1 hit. Because, again, brought in Richard Boone as a bad guy. And they cranked the violence up a notch, so it actually worked. But what would my top 20 American-made westerns be? Well, we'll have to consult Grindhouse Purgatory, because Grindhouse Purgatory is greatest hits. Shameless fucking plug here. Get it from me. Email me at grindhousepurgatory@gmail.com, or buy it from those evil blood-sucking leeches at Amazon.